In Jesus' name I pray, and everybody say with me, amen. I want to ask you to go to 1 Samuel chapter 17. Now, you're going to need to keep your finger there because there was no way in this world that I was going to be able to put all of 1 Samuel 17, which is going to be our reference for the day, up on the big board here. So you're going to have to do that part for yourself. I'll have some of it up here, but not all of it. I'll give you a chance to go there. 1 Samuel chapter 17. Now, while you're going there, I do want to bring a few things back to your memory. Last week we discussed Saul and his being made king over Israel in direct disobedience to the command and the will of the Lord. But Israel wanted it, and they'd been asking for a king for quite some time before this. And God finally says, all right, fine. I'm going to let you have what you want. And he gives them a king named Saul. Now, Saul was a sellout. Saul was for all intents and purposes, he was a pagan. Throughout the course of the last couple of chapters previous to 1 Samuel chapter 17, it doesn't take long for the character of Saul to be revealed. Saul wanted to be the king, and he wanted to be the prophet, and he wanted to be the priest. We know that God never wanted them to have a king, but he became the king, and he was a failure. He wanted to be the prophet. Samuel tells him, son, go on down the road, and this is going to be the sign that I have anointed you to be king, or I have chosen you to be king. Again, not that God was happy about it, or that God was in favor of it. He just said, I'm going to use you. He says, you're going to go down the road, and you're going to meet some people. They're going to offer you some bread, and then you're going to go and you're going to prophesy with the prophets. And it makes a comment a few chapters back that says, because of this event, that there was a saying that was passed down through the generations that said, is Saul among the prophets? Now, we didn't talk about this last week when we read it, but I do want to touch on it this morning. That was not a complimentary statement. That would be like you picking the most rotten scoundrel in the community and saying, oh, is he one of the cops now? Is he one of those who's an upstanding citizen? It was one of those, how shall we say, satirical comments. So Saul was far from a prophet. And remember, he walks in and he doesn't think Samuel the priest gets there in enough time, so he offers up a sacrifice for the people, for the army on his own. Prophet, priest, and king. A man whose heart was nowhere near the Lord. Carnal and natural in his desires. He was a dead man with no life, a blind man with no sight. He was a deaf man with no hearing, and he was trying to do in the flesh what could only be done in the Spirit. Now, we mentioned last week that another character enters the scene named David. David was a shepherd, took care of the sheep. He was a servant. The Bible says a servant who took care of the sacrificial lambs. A servant who stayed on the backside of the field and took care of his dad's sheep. They technically weren't even his possession, but he loved them like they were his own. And we started to get a little bit of a clear picture of the character of David. It says that when Samuel goes to anoint the next king because of Saul's rejection, that Samuel goes down the line and none of the 7 sons of Jesse are the one, and he says, is there another? And yes, but he's out in the field, and he's dirty, and he's not going to be presentable to you. There's no way that you're going to want to make him king, because if I know David, he's probably covered in the mess that the sheep are covered in, because that's the way he was. He would get down in with the sheep, and he would end up looking and smelling like one of the sheep. So he runs and gets them, and here comes David. And God says, that's the one. That's the one. You had Saul on one side who looked like a king. You have David on the other side that looks like a mess. But what you don't see is what will hurt you. On the inside, Saul was a mess. But on the inside, David, the Bible will describe him later as a man after God's own heart. Now, we know that Saul is the king, and as such, he acts as the commander of the armies. A little life lesson here. If you are the husband of your house, the father of your home, the tone or the temperature that you set, the attitude that you give off or that you display to your family is what they're going to pick up and do. You have a huge responsibility. The same goes for the king. Or me as a pastor of the church. If I get up here like some ragtag redneck idiot and hoot and holler and criticize everybody and curse their grapes and do all kinds of ignorant stuff, then what's going to happen in the congregation? They're going to do the same thing. They're going to do the exact same thing. So look with me at 1 Samuel chapter 17, verse 1. Now the Philistines. Woo, the Philistines. The very word Philistine speaks of natural strength and natural power. These men were vicious. They gathered their armies for battle. Why? Why did they gather their armies for battle? What would make them get riled up? I can't put a map up here today. It wouldn't do me any good. But I want you to imagine, if you can, if you know anything about the Middle East, all of the land along the shore or surrounding what we would know as Israel, the Gaza Strip, all of that area up and down through there. The modern-day Palestinian area, the word Palestinian is Philistine. That's who these people, that's where they derive from it, so to speak. They controlled the coast. They controlled the coast. Their primary god was Dagon, who had the head of or the body of a fish and the head of a man and the hands of a man. So they were a coastal people, a seafaring people. But they lived in their little area. Israel was in their area. So what in the world possessed the Philistines to go to battle? It certainly wasn't because of Saul. Remember last week, it was Jonathan that went and attacked the Philistines. He attacked a Philistine garrison and defeated them. And then Saul spreads word that Saul has defeated. No, he didn't. He didn't. Well, what that served to do was rile up the Philistines. I don't think Saul wanted that to happen. That's why he didn't attack them. But Jonathan did. And we're going to talk about why Jonathan did that in just a second, because it's the same reason why David is going to do what he does here in a little bit. But understand that the reason why the Philistines are coming to battle is not because of Saul's bravery. It's because of Saul's cowardice and the bravery of his son. And they were gathered at Soko, which belongs to Judah. So the Philistines were in the Judean territory, or the territory of Judah. And they encamped between Soko and Azekah and Ephes-Dammim. And Saul and the men of Israel were gathered. But does it say anything about them gathered for battle? They were gathered. It mentions in the first part, the Philistines were gathered, they gathered their armies for battle. What about Israel? Well, heck no, they're battling for defense. Oh gosh, we're done. No, what are we going to do? But we got to go out and make a show, because that's what Saul did. Saul made a show to make everyone think that he was so pious and so religious and so holy that he was the king, the chosen one of God. Not because he cared about the Lord and the people of the Lord. He cared about himself. Now he's up against it. He's got to go out there. Saul and the men of Israel were gathered and encamped in the valley of Elah, and drew up in line of battle against the Philistines. Again, not because they were ready to get them. And the Philistines stood on the mountain on the one side, and Israel stood on the mountain on the other side, with a valley between them. And there came out from the camp of the Philistines a champion named Goliath of Gath, whose height was 6 cubits and a span. His height ranged anywhere from 7 foot to 9.5, 10 foot. This cubit was anywhere around 18 inches, so you can do the math there for yourself. Needless to say, this man was a giant, impressively strong individual. It goes on in the next few verses to describe the weight of his armor, some 125 pounds of mail that was on his, or 125 pound spear, 100 and some odd pounds of armor that covered his helmet. We're not told how heavy it was. We know that this man was carrying an immense amount of weight and fighting with implements of war that weighed vast amounts of weight. To say that he conjured up fear in the hearts of the Israelites would be the understatement of the century. I want to draw your attention to one other thing. Remember last week we read about this. There was a man of Benjamin whose name was Kish, the son of Abiel, son of Zeror, son of Bechorath, son of Aphiah, a Benjaminite, a man of wealth. And he had a son whose name was Saul, a handsome young man. He was impressive. There was not a man among the people of Israel more handsome than he was from his shoulders upward. He was taller than any of the people. So it would appear on the surface that you have the coming together of two giants, so to speak. Saul being the largest, the tallest man, the most handsome, the most impressive man in all of Israel to the eye. Against the most impressive man, this Goliath, this man from Gath. Wouldn't you expect Saul to come out in his armor? All right, big boy, let's do it. Goliath comes out expecting this. He wants to draw Saul out. Come on, you bring your best, I'll bring my best. And don't we do that Sunday after Sunday and church after church? We think we're going to come out here. Pastors think they're going to come out in the pulpit. And I'll tell you right now, I'm going to fight the devil and I'm going to fix all your problems. Look, I'm going to be honest with you. You're a mess. You're a mess. So am I. So we're going to come together and we're going to worship the only one who's not a mess. And we're going to let that one who is not a mess fix our mess and put us back together. But not on this day. No, on this day you have the best that the world has to offer coming together in a collision. Well, at least that's what Goliath expects. But I think even Goliath underestimated the cowardice of Saul. See, in Goliath's mind, he thought Saul is the one who attacked us. He wants to fight. Let's go. Come on, big man, let's dance. Let's do it. You want to roll in the dirt? I'll roll in the dirt with you. Let's see what you got, big man. Bring your best. Basically, what Goliath does is he walks out and he says, boys, let me see if I can finish this up real easy. He walks out and he says, hey, take your best man. Put him up here. We don't even have to have these men fight. Let's settle this mano a mano, man to man. Strength to strength. Let's see who's the best out of the bunch. And whoever is the best will be king of all of the people. Well, I mean, to me that sounds like a pretty good deal. Save the men the trouble of having to fight. Oh, but you got to remember, you've got the sissy named Saul, Sissy Saul, sitting in his tent quivering. What are we going to do? What are we going to do? But he can't let anybody see him. That's why he's in his tent. He's got to appear to be strong. What is it about this encounter that reveals, or what is it about this encounter that indicts Saul? What is it about this that reveals to us the depth of Saul's true character? We're not going to read a lot of verses, but there's a few verses I want to share with you. Now remember, when God calls the people of Abraham to follow him and be the human lineage that would bring the Christ to the earth, he tells them they are not to live like the rest of the world, that they are to be separate, to be different, to be a peculiar people for him. We hear the same message. The church is told that we are to be a chosen generation, a royal priesthood, a peculiar people, a chosen generation, that we should show forth the praises of him who hath called us out of darkness into his marvelous light. Well, if you go back to when God calls Moses and the people of God out of Egypt, the land of sin. He brings them out and tells them to go to the land that I promised your father Abraham. See, they got stuck in Egypt and they didn't keep going. So God brings them out under persecution and sends them off to the promised land. And it says in Joshua chapter 1 that after the death of Moses, the servant of the Lord said to Joshua, the son of Nun, Moses' assistant, Moses, my servant, is dead. Now, therefore, arise. Go over this Jordan, you and all this people, into the land that I am giving to them, to the people of Israel. Where in here is there any mention of stopping or settling or not giving up or not giving the fight necessary to obtain it? You see that nowhere. It goes on and says, every place that the sole of your foot will tread upon, I have already given to you, just as I promised to Moses. So even though you have to fight, the victory is already won. From the wilderness in this Lebanon, as far as the great river, the river Euphrates, all the land of the Hittites to the great sea toward the going down of the sun shall be your territory. No man shall be able to stand before you all the days of your life. Just as I was with Moses, so I will be with you. I will not leave you or forsake you. Be strong and courageous, for you shall cause this people to inherit the land that I swore to their fathers to give them. Only be strong and very courageous, being careful to do according to all the law that Moses my servant commanded you. Do not turn to the left hand or the right, that you may have good success wherever you go. This book of the law shall not depart from your mouth, but you shall meditate on it day and night, so that you may be careful to do according to all that is written in it. For then you will make your way prosperous, and then you will have good success. You want to know why your life isn't successful? Why you are facing the turmoil you're facing? You are not obeying the commands of the Lord. That's very simple. Have I not commanded you? How many times is he going to say this to Joshua? Be strong and courageous. Do not be frightened and do not be dismayed. For the Lord your God is with you wherever you go. Now, stop there. Fast forward to this battle. Here, Saul, the Benjaminite, an Israelite, one who should have heard this repeated over and over and over again in his ears from the day he was born until the day that he became a man. He should have known this. Not only should he have known it, it's not enough to have it in here. It should have been in his heart. He should have seen it modeled over and over and over again, year after year after year, by his family. But instead of following after the Lord, they had chased after political gain and wealth. And they got it. They got the wealth. They had the political power. But they did not have the word of the Lord. Oh, now we're getting somewhere. Saul was a man who had lived his life to satisfy his fleshly, carnal desires. He was a man who was called, just like David, just like Joshua, to take the people into the land and to be strong and courageous and believe that the Lord had already given him the battle. But instead, he turned after that which would bless his body instead of that which would bless his soul. Oh, but not David. What about David? Oh. The Bible tells us that when David was out in the field with the sheep, that he pulled out his harp and his lyre and he would play songs to the Lord and he would worship. He wouldn't just read words off of a screen or repeat back what someone... He was worshiping. No one was there but the sheep. And they probably wanted him to shut up so they could sleep. He would play and he would sing to the Lord. What do you think he was singing? He was singing back to the Lord what the Lord had said to his people all of these years. And as a young man, he would say, Lord, you can go to the book of Psalms right now and find his songs all over the place. He would sing to the Lord, Lord, I don't know how you're going to do it. I don't see a way out of this, but I know that you are the God that makes a way when there is no way. You are the God that delivers his people, not because of what his people are worth, but because of who you are. You keep your word to 1,000 generations, and you will not let us falter. You will not let us fail. David, as a young man, would sing songs about the glory of the Lord and the promise of his coming Messiah. And every time he would sing those songs, he would look out at those sheep that he was taking care of, and he saw the Lord. He had a clear vision of heaven. He had a perfect understanding of what was one day coming and what would one day satisfy the desire of the human soul. And he knew that God would keep his word, but not Saul. Saul sees Goliath and he says, oh no, what am I going to do? How can I get out of this? How can I save my reputation? What can I do to get out of this bind? Now I'm fast forwarding a little bit. And it says that the Philistine came out in verse 16 for 40 days. He came out morning and evening for 40 days. Saul did nothing. He did nothing for 40 days. He let this man come out and intimidate and belittle and berate his people. And more so than that, he allowed this man to come out and to defy the God of Israel. God had clearly spoken to Joshua, I will give you the victory. It's already won. Only be strong and courageous. But instead, this man stays in his tent in fear. What will the people do now? If the Philistines overcome and take them, they're finished. The Philistines will take their women, and there will be no more Israelite. There will be no way for the Messiah to come if this takes place, because if this people of giants corrupts the DNA that would lead to the Christ, there would be no Christ. But God, in his wonderful mercy, sees the end from the beginning. And before the giant ever steps foot onto the scene, God already calls a young man named David to be the mighty deliverer of his people. David, a young man. David, a little boy. David, a teenager. David, a man with no war experience. David, a man with no real life experience, so to speak. He was no politician. He held no weight in the community. He was just a servant. Many times, young people, you think, I'm just a servant. What good could I be? Do you know that every time you write down in your prayer journals the things that the Lord says to you, that is more precious to him than anything else that could ever be done in your life? When you talk to the Lord and you pray and you ask the Lord to come in and take control of every facet of your life, to eliminate any sin that is in your life and to replace it with the glorious presence of his Spirit, when you talk to and encounter the Lord in that way, you are doing the stuff that is unimaginable. And the Lord is moving in your life. David did it. David did it. When we come out here and we spend 45 minutes in prayer, and we're just waiting on the Lord to talk to us and tell us what he wants to say, we're doing the same thing David did. And then one day the Lord comes out of nowhere. Can you imagine being in the field with David that day? I don't know who went and got him, but somebody goes and gets him and says, come on, David, hurry up, get your butt in here. Well, hold on a minute. Here, will you watch these sheep? Don't know what they want now. Who knows? They want to sit up there and act all big stuff. My brothers do. They're a bunch of politicians, crooks. Now I got to go up here and see what they want. Who knows? I guess I got to wash their donkeys. I don't know. So he runs up to the house. He doesn't even have time to change. He just walks in the door, and there stands Samuel. And David thinks, oh, my Lord, whoa, what has my daddy done now? And Samuel says, you're the one. And David says, okay, for what? And he pours that oil over his head. Jesse's jaw hits the floor. His brother's hearts hit the floor. And David stands there saying, someone catch me because I'm about to hit the floor. As that oil dripped down his head over that nasty sheep-covered filth, all the way down from his head to his toes, and he stood there going, what? No, it's not what he did. I believe when that hit his head and it hit his mind what was going on, that David's spirit said, oh, Lord God, whatever you say, I'll say. Whatever you tell me to do, I'll do. And I believe in that moment there was a worship service like his family had never seen. We're going to find out later that David's notorious for worship. He worshiped so hard that he'd come out of his clothes one day. David didn't care about who saw him or what they said. He would lift his hands in the middle of the city square and glorify the Lord. And we can't even get people to raise their hand on a Sunday morning for fear someone's going to think they're crazy. David didn't care. And David says, oh, I've not sought the Lord for as many years as other people have had on this earth. But I can tell you this, I've sought the Lord every day of my life that I've had. And because of that, the Lord calls him up. It says in verse 12 of 1 Samuel 17, well, let me back up. In verse 10 it says, and the Philistines said, I defy the ranks of Israel this day. Give me a man that we may fight together. That's an insult. He was calling them women. Give me a man. What he's saying is, if you got one in there, bring him out. I don't see any men. You got a real man? Bring him out if you do. When Saul and all Israel heard these words of the Philistine, they were dismayed and greatly afraid. Go back real quick. I want to read to you from Joshua. Only be strong and courageous. That word strong means mental. Don't be dismayed. Don't be dismayed. And don't be frightened. What does it say about the men? They were dismayed and greatly afraid. David was the son of an Ephrathite of Bethlehem in Judah named Jesse, who had 8 sons in the days of Saul. The man was already old and advanced in years. Now there's a purpose to this being said here. Jesse, his name means wealth. It means not wealth necessarily in financial terms, but a man of wealth, of stature, a man of respect. But he's an old man now, and he can't go out and fight like the boys, like he once would have. Jesse's confined to the home, and his boys are out fighting. But the boys don't have the same fight that Daddy had, and Daddy knows that. And Daddy can't go out there and save the boys because of the coward Saul, who's the king. So Daddy has to come up with a different mode of getting things done. The 3 oldest sons of Jesse had followed Saul to the battle. The names of his 3 sons who went to the battle were Eliab, the firstborn, next to him, Abinadab, and the third, Shammah. David was the youngest. The 3 eldest followed Saul, but David went back and forth from Saul to feed his father's sheep at Bethlehem. And then it tells us about the 40 days of Goliath coming out and challenging the people. Now, remember, the reason why David's coming back and forth between the sheep and his father is because, between Saul and the sheep, is because Saul was tormented by demons, and only David could chase them away. And how did David chase them away? It was through his worship. David had power not in the carnal, fleshly realm alone. That was the victory that God would give. But David had power in the heavenlies, in the spiritual aspect of things. David carried weight, and he could even control or send out or cast out devils. And Jesse said to David, his son, his servant son, take for your brothers an ephah of this parched grain and these 10 loaves and carry them quickly. He says to carry them quickly to the camp to your brothers. Now, hold on to that thought. And also take these 10 cheeses to the commander of their 1,000. See if your brothers are well, and bring some token from them. Jesse's terrified. His sons are going to die. They don't stand a chance with this coward Saul. So he tells David, I want you to do me a favor. We know that Samuel's sons are corrupt. Because the Bible tells us that the people knew this because his sons took bribes. And they said, oh, the priesthood is corrupt. When Samuel's gone, we don't have a chance. As it goes with the priesthood, so it goes with the people. So Jesse says, the only way for me to get things done with Saul and his kingdom is to do things a worldly way. So he tells David, go and take this bread to your brothers. That's your excuse for going. That was his key to get into the camp. Go under the guise of bringing bread for your brothers. But what's the real purpose of his visit? Take these 10 cheeses to the commander of the thousands. See if you can bribe them. See if you can get your brothers off the front lines. Make sure he knows that this is from Jesse. And maybe I still carry a little weight in the camp of the king. But if not, the cheese will talk. Maybe we can get your brothers out. Well, he makes one big mistake, though. He sends David. Now Saul and all the men of Israel were in the valley of Elah fighting with the Philistines. They weren't fighting. They were trying their best to not get killed. And David rose early in the morning and left the sheep with a keeper, because he takes care of the sheep, and took the provisions and went as Jesse commanded him. And he came to the encampment as the host was going out to the battle line, shouting the war cry. And Israel and the Philistines drew up for battle, army against army. And David left the bread and the cheese in charge of the keeper of the baggage, meaning that he did not take the earthly strategy. He left that behind, and he ran to the ranks and went to greet his brothers. And he talked with them, or as he talked with them, behold, the champion, the Philistine of Gath, Goliath by name, came up out of the ranks of the Philistines and spoke the same words as before, only this time something different happens. This time David heard them. Oh, man! You got to think his brothers were going, oh, man, that loudmouth is going to hear him. He's going to say something. Oh, my Lord. And all the men of Israel, when they saw the man, fled from him and were much afraid. And David looks and says, where are you going? And the men of Israel said, have you seen this man who has come up? Surely he has come to destroy us. And the king will enrich the man who kills him with great riches, and will give him his daughter, and make his father's house free in Israel. And David said to the men who stood by, and he said, why do you got to give them money to get them to do it? Shouldn't you just do it because you know that the Lord is going to give you the victory? Why do you need a woman? Why do you need money? Should not you obey the Lord no matter what? And David said to the men who stood by him, what shall be done for the man who kills the Philistine and takes away the reproach from Israel? Who cares about that is what he's saying. He's not asking them to repeat it because he goes, ooh, I'm going to get me a hot mama and some money. No. He says, are you serious? Are you telling me that our king is offering money to somebody to bribe them, to get them to go and fight? Do you see the corruption of Israel? It's bribery everywhere. My Lord, it looks like the White House. It's everywhere. And David says, all you all ever wanted was to be in the White House. You wanted to be the president of the United States. Get a Christian in the White House and everything will change. My God, the old men would say, we don't want that filthy place. It's nothing but a house of filthy lucre. We don't want anything to do with it. But today, we want to be just like them. We've got to be political. We've got to be the mayor. We've got to be the king. We've got to be in charge, because then we impose our will. But at no point has God ever imposed himself on any man. Never. And David says, what have we become? Oh, what a wretched man that we are. He says, who is this uncircumcised Philistine that he should defy the armies of the living God? Only be thou strong and courageous, and the Lord will give you the battle. David says, who is this man? And the people answered him in the same way, because they didn't understand what David was saying. Isn't that a tragedy? These men did not understand where David was coming from. He was saying, man, God has promised us the victory. And these people are saying, well, I guess it's worth a shot. I mean, you do get a hot woman and some money, and none of your people will be slaves to the king. And David stands there and goes, now Eliab, his eldest brother, heard what he spoke, or when he spoke to the men. And he was madder than fire at David, and he said, "Why have you come down here, you little punk? And who have you left those few little sheep with, big boy? You're going to come down here and talk big and bad, and all you do is take care of some sheep? I know your presumption and the evil of your heart. His brother's attacking him for doing what God said to do. And you've come down to see the battle." And David says, "See the battle? Ain't nothing to see." And David says, "What have I done now? Was it not but a word? Was I not repeating to the men the same words that God had spoke to Joshua?" So he turned away from him toward another, and spoke in the same way. And the people answered him again as before. When the words that David spoke were heard, they repeated them before Saul, and he sent for him. And David said to Saul, "Let no man's heart fail because of David." Not because of God, but because of David. David says to Saul, "Let no man's heart fail because of Goliath." And he says, "Your servant will go and fight this Philistine." Saul said to David, "You're not able to fight him." Well, sure you're not. If you're looking at it from a physical perspective. From a natural perspective, he couldn't fight him. You're not able to fight with this Philistine. You're just a kid, a young man. And he's been a man of war since he was a young man. Oh, but David said to Saul, "Your servant used to keep sheep for his father, and when there came a lion or a bear and took a lamb from the flock, I went after him and struck him and delivered it out of his mouth. And if he arose against me, I caught him by his beard and struck him and killed him. Your servant has struck down both lions and bears, and this uncircumcised Philistine giant shall be like one of them, for he has defied the armies of the living God." Not me, but he's defied the Lord. And David said, "The Lord who delivered me from the paw of the lion and from the paw of the bear will deliver me from the hand of this Philistine." And Saul said to David, "Go, and the Lord be with you." What a pious jerk. "The Lord be with you." What Lord? Saul had no Lord but himself. And then Saul says, "Hey, David, hey, whoa, before you go out there, here, put on my armor. That way, when you go out and get killed, people will think Saul was brave and he tried to fight this giant and he died for his people. What a great man." Do you know why that was? Because Saul wanted to be a Philistine. Saul wanted to be just like them. He would have turned tail, made a beeline straight for the Philistine camp, and said, "If you let me live, I'll serve you the rest of my days." Why? Because he already was. He wanted to be just like him. David says, "I can't take this armor. Man, you're head and shoulders taller than everybody else. I'm walking around looking like some kind of weirdo. I can't fight in this garbage." He says, "Take it off. I don't need that. I don't need any fleshly means to do this battle. This is the Lord's battle." He took his staff in his hand, and he chose 5 smooth stones from the brook. Why is that? Because there were 5 lords of the Philistines, 5 kings of the Philistines. And the Philistines were the last bastion of Canaanite peoples that had not been taken out yet. And David said, "I'm going to do what the Lord has commanded us to do. I'm going to take this territory, subdue it, and take out the Philistines." Now we know what happens after this. They come out to fight. David lines up against the Goliath. And the Philistine says, "Am I a dog that you come to me with sticks?" And the Philistine tells David, "Come to me, and I will give your flesh to the birds of the air and to the beasts of the field." And he begins to laugh. David ain't laughing. David, doing what Saul should have done, stands and looks at the Philistine and says, "You come to me with a sword and with a spear and with a javelin, the implements of human effort. But I come to you in the name of the Lord of hosts, the God of the armies of Israel, whom you defied this day. The Lord will deliver you into my hand, and I will strike you down and cut off your head. And I will give the dead bodies of the host of the Philistines this day to the birds of the air and to the wild beasts of the field, that the earth, all of the earth, may know that the Lord saves not with sword and spear. For the battle is the Lord's, and he will give you into our hand." And with that, David commences his speech, and he, after Goliath makes a move toward him, reaches in his packet, takes out a stone, hurls it, hits Goliath in the head. Goliath falls to the ground. And without waiting to see if Goliath would get up, we don't know that the stone killed him. It could have, but it also could have just rattled him, knocked him out. To make sure that the deed was done, David runs over because he doesn't have a sword. He takes Goliath's sword and takes off his head. And in doing so, he made sure that everyone knew that Goliath was dead and that it was not David that did it, but it was the God of Israel who gave them that victory. Are you David or are you Saul? Who are you? Are you trying to make a godly life using what this flesh and blood can produce? Are you trying to serve the Lord in your own strength? Or are you relying solely on the word of the Lord? Are you listening to His voice and repeating back to the devil what God has said to you? Are you busy fighting with all the little issues of life, or are you going after the giant? Are you scared to go and fight the giant because you don't think you can overcome him? Well, you can't, but He can. Are you trying to look religious like Saul? Or have you been born again? Saul was a dead man trying to look alive. But David was a dead man who had been resurrected back to glorious, regenerated life. David was a man who no longer listened to the voice of the world, but he only listened to the voice of the Lord. How about you? What voice do you listen to? Are you busy trying to fix the world with your will and your way and your abilities and your strength? Are you trying to satisfy yourself with wealth and political gain, notoriety and dignity and all of those things that are given here on this earth? Or are you one who is seeking only the honor, seeking only to bless and to be a blessing to and to be blessed by the Lord God Almighty? Are you born again? I fear there are many in the church today, maybe even here in this congregation, who are not born again but think they are. Just because you know the stories doesn't mean that you're in obedience. Saul knew, he just didn't obey. He didn't comply. How about you? Are you complying with the will of the Lord? David did. David wasn't good. David made mistakes. David messed up after this. But he still was a man after God's own heart. Why? Because when he was confronted with the truth, David never ran from it. He admitted it and he owned it. He repented of it and he confessed it and he carried it. There are far too many in the church today. You're content. You're content to let Goliath live in your life so long as you're allowed to live a little bit of a carnal existence. You're willing to let the giants of this world exist in your home and in your family. Your marriage is a mess because you won't deal with your giant. Your family is a mess because you won't deal with your giant. Today we get on Facebook and we argue about heroin, or we argue about alcohol, or we argue about some stupid politician. But we won't fight our giant. Well, tell me who that giant is so I can go get him. Will you tell me his name? Tell me who he is, and I will carry him to the Lord, and I will ask the Lord to destroy this giant. The giant is you. It's you. It's you. It's me. That's our giant. It's your flesh. I'm going to do what I want to do the way I want to do it, and no one is going to tell me any different. I'm going to defy the God of heaven and earth, just like Goliath. No, it's not my fault. It's somebody else's fault. It's not me. It's because of how I was raised. It's not me. It's because of this. It's not me. It's the drugs. I'm an addict. It's not me. I'm addicted to porn, or I'm addicted to whatever it is that the Lord says. No, you're not. No, you're addicted to you. You are addicted to yourself. You want to please yourself. You want to do what you want to do and get the blessing of God, and that's not going to happen. If Goliath was left alone that day, he would have destroyed the army of Israel. He would have taken their women and raped them, and they would have all been wiped out. But a young man, armed with but a sling and one stone. He had 5 stones. He had 1 stone for Goliath. The other 4 were for the 4 kings of Philistine that were left. He shouldn't have been able to do it, but he did. There's no way this can happen, but God did it. You know what I want to hear? You know what I want to hear week after week and day after day and Sunday after Sunday? I want to hear stories about how the Lord did something that we couldn't do. I didn't know what I was going to do, but the Lord did this. I don't know how it happened. I just know the Lord did it. I don't know what I'm going to do, Jeremy. I don't have any idea. I don't have any hope in this matter, but I know that the Lord is with me. And instead of getting scared and turning to my flesh and trying to do it my way, I'm going to do it His way, even if that means I have to admit that I'm wrong. Even if that means I have to own my mistake. Even if I have to confess that I am the one standing in need of prayer. Even if I have to stand up and be counted, I will not let this giant me rule my life. When you become a Christian, when you become a regenerated, blood-bought, born-again believer, when you have your life transformed, you move from death to life. And that giant that you once wrestled with is destroyed. Why are you still fighting it then? Why are you still fighting it? Well, maybe you never killed him in the first place. Jesus said, well, the Word says, they honor me with their mouths, but their hearts are far from me. What comes out of here doesn't matter. What's in here? This little thumping thing inside my chest is carrying blood to the whole of my body. And whatever enters in there goes throughout my whole being. You must be born again. Your giant dies. Your flesh dies. You are either not born again or you have been lied to and you are continuing to fight a defeated foe. So this morning I encourage you, take off that giant's head. Make your calling and election sure. Work out your own salvation with fear and trembling and make sure that you are born again. Make sure that you have conquered that enemy. Make sure that your flesh is not in control, but that you are following the will of the Lord, the will of the Spirit. Fathers, take ownership of your homes and pray that the Lord reach your children, and do so with tears and with agony if necessary. Give the enemy no room, because if you do, your sons and your daughters will, and your grandchildren will. And they'll end up just like the mess that Israel was in when Jesse was reduced to having to try through physical means to subdue or to purchase the freedom of his boys. You are your giant. The devil made me. No, you chose to do it. Own it. Confess it. And kill it. Would you stand with me this morning?